"You the guy the general sent." The voice, sharp and laced with disbelief, cut through the cavernous hum of the maintenance bay. Lieutenant Miller, oh, crisp angles and youthful confidence, stood with his arms crossed, a data slate tucked under one arm. He looked Gerald Walsh up and down, his gaze lingering on the faded flannel shirt and the deep lines etched around the old man's eyes. "You've got to be kidding me." Gerald, who had seen 78 winters, offered no reaction. His hands gnarled, but steady, rested on the handles of a canvas tool bag that looked as old as he was. His calm blue eyes swept over the scene, the controlled chaos of engineers in digital camouflage, the tangle of thick cables snaking across the polished concrete floor, and the silent, monolithic beast at the center of it all, the M1 Abrams tank. It sat there, like a patient on an operating table, its gun dormant, its spirit broken. All around it laptops glowed with complex schematics and error codes, monuments to a problem that technology could name but not solve. Miller took a step forward, his polished boots clicking with impatience. "Look, sir, no disrespect, but we've got a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment down and a hard deadline from command. We don't have time for a field trip." He gestured vaguely at Gerald's simple attire. "Do you have any credentials? Base access? Anything?" The maintenance bay was a cathedral of modern warfare. A space so large that voices echoed in the scent of diesel, hydraulic fluid, and ozone hung permanently in the air. For 3 days, this cathedral had been a place of failed worship. The best engineers of the 1st Armored Division had thrown everything they had at the crippled Abrams. The issue was as baffling as it was infuriating. A phantom pressure drop in the turret traverse system. Every diagnostic test, every sensor check, every manual override came back with the same result, sus nominal. Yet the turret remained sluggish, groaning under the strain of movement, its hydraulic heart beating with a fatal arrhythmia that no one could trace. It was a ghost in the machine, and it was mocking them. Lieutenant Miller was in charge of this exorcism, and his patience had evaporated 12 hours ago. He was a product of a new army, an officer who trusted algorithms and digital readouts more than gut feelings. He saw the world in binary code, in pass-fail tests, and now General Thompson, the one man he needed to impress, had sent him this relic. "Name's Gerald Walsh," the old man said, his voice a low rumble, quiet but carrying. He reached into his worn leather wallet and produced a simple, laminated visitor's pass. Miller barely glanced at it. "Right, Mr. Walsh. And what exactly are your qualifications? Did you work on these in a factory? A museum, maybe?" A few of the younger engineers nearby snickered. They were tired, frustrated, and happy for any distraction, especially one that affirmed their own modern expertise over what looked like a misplaced grandfather. Gerald's eyes didn't leave the tank. "Something like that," he murmured. He set his heavy canvas bag on the floor with a soft thud. The sound was starkly organic in the synthetic, electronic environment. He began to unroll it, revealing not a collection of gleaming modern instruments, but a set of old oil-stained tools. They were dark with age and use, their wooden handles worn smooth by a lifetime of pressure, their steel heads bearing the nicks and scars of countless stubborn bolts. "Oh, this is rich," Miller said louder now, playing to his audience of frustrated soldiers. "We've got guys with PhDs in mechanical engineering running quantum diagnostics, and command sends us a guy with a hammer and some rusty wrenches." Gerald ignored him. His movements were slow, deliberate, a study in economy. He wasn't wasting a single motion. He selected a long, thin steel rod and walked toward the silent Abrams, his worn work boots making no sound on the floor. He ran a hand along the cold steel of the turret ring, his touch gentle like a doctor palpating a patient. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the vehicle, Miller commanded, his voice hardening. It's a sensitive piece of military hardware, not a classic car. Gerald didn't seem to hear him. He knelt, his old knee protesting with a soft groan, and laid his ear against the tank's hull, tapping it gently with the steel. Rudd, he was listening. The absurdity of the scene was thick enough to taste. The young lieutenant, a master of digital systems, was watching an old man use a technique that belonged in the age of steam engines. The engineers exchanged glances, a mixture of pity and ridicule. This was the Hail Mary. This was the secret weapon the general had promised. That's it. I've seen enough, Miller snapped. He turned to his master, Sergeant, a seasoned NCO named Evans, who had been watching the exchange with a stony expression. Sergeant, find out who cleared this man for access. I want him off my floor now. Master Sergeant. Evans hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. He had seen the general's name on the access request. He knew General Thompson didn't make whimsical decisions, but a lieutenant's order was an order. Sir, he began, but Miller cut him off. Now, Master, Sergeant. As Evans reluctantly moved to intercept Gerald, the old man pulled another tool from his roll. It was a bizarro-looking wrench, a heavy piece of steel with a TER handle and a head that had clearly been modified. It was crudely welded in places, ground down in others, a Frankenstein's monster of a tool that no manufacturer would ever claim. Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. What in God's name is that? Did you make that in your garage? What are you going to do with it? Beat the tank into submission. The insult hung in the air. For the first time, Gerald's methodical movements paused. He looked down at the ugly custom-made wrench in his hand, and for a fleeting moment, the humming bay around him dissolved. The world was not concrete and fluorescent light, but mud in the torrential, freezing rain of the Iraqi desert in 1991. He wasn't 78. He was a 30-something master gunner, his face smeared with grease and grime. The sound wasn't the hum of diagnostics, but the distant percussive thunder of an artillery duel. His Abrams, Bad Penny, had taken a hit to the turret drive. It was stuck, a death sentence in the tank. Battle, the standard-issue torque wrench, was too bulky. The angle was impossible. They were dead in the water. So, under the hellish green glow of chemical lights, using a piece of salvage metal from a destroyed enemy vehicle and a field welder, he had forged this ugly, brutish, beautiful tool. The tool that had saved his crew. The wrench in his hand wasn't just a piece of scrap metal. It was a memory forged in fire and desperation. He blinked and the maintenance base solidified around him. Again, he saw the smirking lieutenant, the curious engineers, the approaching master sergeant. He saw the challenge in their eyes, the complete and utter dismissal. He hadn't asked to be here. He had been perfectly content in his quiet workshop, rebuilding a lawnmower engine. But the general had called, and you don't say no to the general. Miller, his patience finally gone, pulled out his radio. Base security. This is Lieutenant Miller in Maintenance Bay 7. I require an escort for civilian. Non-compliant. He spoke with the clipped, self-important authority of a man who had never truly been challenged. As Miller relayed the instructions, Master Sergeant Evans made a decision. He had seen enough. He had seen the quiet dignity in the old man's face, the practiced ease of his hands. He'd seen the flash of something in his eyes when Miller mocked the wrench. Not anger, but a deep, distant sorrow. Evans knew the smell of, and he knew the feel of competence. The lieutenant was reeking of the former, and the old man radiated the latter. He slipped his phone from his pocket, turning his back to the lieutenant. He found the number for the general's aide-de-camp. The phone barely rang once before it was answered. "Major, it's Master Sergeant Evans down in Base 7, he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get the general down here right now. The specialist he sent for the Abrams, Lieutenant Miller, is having him removed by the MPs. I think he's making a very big mistake." A pause on the other end of the line, then a string of curses that would have made a drill sergeant blush. "Stay there, Evans. We're on our way." The call ended. The cavalry was coming, and for the first time in 3 days, Master Sergeant Evans felt a sliver of hope that the ghost in the machine might finally be exorcised. The injustice in the air was thick, but the promise of its correction was now racing across the base. Inside the sprawling command headquarters, General Thompson listened to the report from his aide, his face growing darker with every word. The phone was still pressed to his ear, but his mind was miles away, back in the swirling dust of a desert war. "What do you mean Miller is kicking him out?" The general's voice was a low growl, a seismic event contained within the wood-paneled office. "Does that arrogant young fool have any idea who he is talking to?" "No, sir." The aide's voice crackled from the speakerphone. "He just sees an old man Evans said is calling. Security." Thompson slammed his free hand on the solid oak desk, rattling a row of neatly arranged challenge coins. "Get me the 3rd Armored Division archives. Now, pull the file on Master Gunner Gerald Walsh. I want his complete service record, and I want you to highlight Operation Desert Storm, specifically the Battle of 73 Easting. Then get my vehicle and meet me at the door in 2 minutes." As the aide scrambled to comply, the general paced, his fury a palpable force in the room. He knew Miller, a sharp kid, top of his class at West Point, an expert in the new digital army, but he was green, and his arrogance was a liability. He saw experience as an outdated data set, easily replaced by a faster processor. A moment later, the aide's voice returned, breathless. "Sir, I have it. My God, Walsh Gerald, Master Gunner, credited with 14 confirmed armor to Arawa kills in 72 hours, awarded the Silver Star for valor after holding a flank against a superior enemy force when it platoons. Targeting systems failed. Developed over 30 non-standard field expedient repairs for the M1A1 platform, many of which were later adopted into official maintenance doctrine. Sir, his battalion nicknamed him the Ghost in the Machine. Exactly. Thompson bit out because he could fix things no one else could. He could feel what was wrong with a 70-ton tank just by being near it. Now get that car. Back in Base 7, the final act of the drama was unfolding. 2 military police officers, young and impassive, had arrived. They stood at attention, waiting for Miller's command. Miller turned to Gerald, a smirk of triumph on his face. "All right, sir, time to go. We appreciate you stopping by, but as you can see, we have actual work to do here." He gestured dismissively towards the MPs. "They'll show you the way out. Please escort Mr. Walsh from the facility." Gerald didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply looked at the silent Abrams one last time, a flicker of what looked like pity in his eyes. He slowly bent down and began to pack his old tools, each one placed carefully back into its worn slot in the canvas roll. The metallic click of the security escort's handcuffs jingling on their belts seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Miller, his authority asserted, turned back to his frustrated team. See, this is what happens when we rely on relics and rumors. Let's get back to the diagnostics. Rerun the full suite. The problem is in the code. People. We just have to find it. He had pushed past the point of no return, cementing his ignorance in front of his entire crew. His words were still hanging in the air when a new sound pierced the bays. Ambient hum. It was a high-pitched squeal of tires on pavement, a sound of extreme urgency. Every head turned towards the massive open bay doors. A black command vehicle. It's official. Plates and flags denoting its passengers. Rank slid to a halt just outside. It was flanked by two sand-cold hums, their engines rumbling like angry lions. The doors of the command car flew open, and out stepped General Thompson. He was a tall, imposing man, but today he seemed larger, his presence amplified by a cold, controlled rage. The two stars on his collar glittered under the fluorescent lights. He was followed by his aide and the formidable base sergeant. Major. They didn't walk. They strode, moving with a velocity and purpose that sent a ripple of alarm through the entire bay. The chatter died. The clanging of tools ceased. The whirring of laptops seemed to fade into the background. Every soldier, from the lowest private to Lieutenant Miller, snapped to attention. General Thompson's eyes scanned the scene, taking in the MPs, the humiliated old man packing his tools, and the smug lieutenant. His gaze was like a laser, and it settled on Miller, who suddenly looked very young and very small. But the general ignored him. He walked right past his junior officer as if he were a piece of equipment, his polished boots echoing like hammer blows on the concrete floor. He marched directly to the stooped figure of Gerald Walsh. He stopped 1 foot in front of the old man. The entire bay held its collective breath. Then, in a movement that was crisp, powerful, and utterly sincere, the two-star general, commanding the entire armored division, snapped to the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. Master Gunner Walsh. General Thompson's voice boomed, filling the cavernous space. It is an honor to have you on my post, sir. Gerald, halfway through rolling up his tool bag, slowly straightened up. 100 pairs of eyes were on him. He looked at the general, a man who commanded thousands of soldiers, and gave a simple civilian nod of acknowledgement. A faint knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth. The MPs froze, their hands hovering uncertainly near their sidearms. Lieutenant Miller's jaw went slack, his face draining of all color. The general dropped his salute, but kept his eyes locked on Gerald. Then he turned his head slowly, deliberately to face the stunned audience of engineers, his gaze finally coming to rest on the petrified lieutenant. For those of you who were not properly briefed, the general announced, his voice ringing with authority and shame, allow me to introduce you. This is Gerald Walsh, the man who wrote the book on Abrams. Maintenance, not the one you checked out of the library at Fort Knox, the real one, the one written in sweat, grease, and battlefield necessity. In 1991, this man's platoon was ambushed in a sandstorm. Their thermal sights were down. He climbed out of his turret under fire and talked his gunner onto a target, using a pair of binoculars and hand signals. That's a verified kill. By the way, a memo went through the crowd of young soldiers. They looked at Gerald, at his simple flannel shirt and his wrinkled hands, and tried to reconcile that image with the legend the general was describing. This man once diagnosed a fleet-wide turbine flaw that had stumped the engineers at General Dynamics for 6 months. Thompson continued, his voice rising. He did it by listening to the engines whine during a cool-down cycle. He saved the United States Army $50 million and likely dozens of lives. We are standing in a bay full of state-of-the-art diagnostic computers, and not a single one of them has the experience, the intuition, and the sheer mechanical genius of this man. Right here, he took a step toward Lieutenant Miller, who looked as if he wanted the concrete floor to swallow him. Oh, the general didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The icy, controlled disappointment in his tone was more devastating than any shout. Lieutenant, you are a fine officer when it comes to networks and systems, but you have a catastrophic gap in your understanding of respect. You have more diagnostic technology in that data slate than the entire Third Army had in the Gulf, and yet you failed. You failed because you looked at this man and saw his age, not his wisdom. You saw his old clothes, not his experience. You dismissed the one man on this continent who could solve your problem because he didn't fit your profile of a modern soldier. The rebuke was complete. A public dressing down that Miller would carry for the rest of his career. The general turned back to Gerald. Mr. Walsh, on behalf of my command, I sincerely apologize for the conduct of my officer. Gerald simply raised a hand, a gesture of absolution. His young general, full of books and fire. We were all like that once. He then looked directly at Miller, his eyes holding not malice but a quiet, profound pity. The machine is just steel and wires. Son, it has a voice, a rhythm. You have to learn to listen to it, not just plug it in. Your diagnostics are looking for a broken part. They aren't listening for a tired one. He reached into his canvas roll and his hand closed around the strange, ugly custom-made wrench. He held it up. This helps you listen. The maintenance bay faded away again, replaced by a memory not of battle, but of its aftermath. The Iraqi sky was a bruised purple. A much younger Gerald Walsh sat on the hull of his tank, showing a fresh-faced private, a kid, barely out of high school, the tool he had just made. He was grinding it with a file, refining the angles. Sometimes the standard tools don't fit the real world problem, he explained to the wide-eyed boy. They are made for a perfect world, a factory floor. This world ain't perfect, so you don't complain. You just make a new tool. The memory underscored the moral. Adapt, listen, and respect the problem enough to create a unique solution. Back in the present, Gerald, holding the wrench, finally toned his full attention to the crippled Abrams, with the general, a humbled lieutenant, Miller, and the entire crew of engineers, watching in rapt silence. He walked to the side of the tank. He didn't plug in a single device. He simply placed his free hand flat on the cold steel of the turret casing just above the massive ring gear and closed his eyes for a moment. He was a physician sensing a fever. Start the APU, he said quietly. An engineer complied in the tank's auxiliary power unit wed to life. Now, try to traverse the turret slowly. Miller, his voice now a meek whisper, relayed the command to the operator. Inside, the familiar sickening groan of stressed hydraulics filled the bay. The massive turret lurched, then stuttered. Gerald didn't move his hand. He just listened, his head tilted slightly. A slight nod, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He had heard what he needed to. Here, he took his ugly battle-born wrench, knelt, and contorted his body to reach a spot deep within the turrets. Complex machinery, a spot no diagnostic probe could access. The engineers craned their necks, trying to see what he was doing. They saw nothing but the old man's focused expression. He fitted the wrench onto something unseen, paused, and then gave a single firm practice turn. It was not a feat of strength, but a precision. A solid metallic thunk echoed from deep within the tank's guts. He pulled the wrench out, stood up, and wiped a smudge of grease from his knuckle with a red shop rag. "Try it. Now," he said. Miller, looking to the general for approval and receiving a sharp nod, gave the order. "Traverse. Left." The command was given, and the response was immediate, silent, and perfect. The 70-ton turret with its massive 120mm cannon swung in a smooth, frictionless whisper-quiet arc. It moved with a deadly grace it was designed for. The groan was gone. The stutter was gone. The ghost had been laid to rest. A wave of stunned silence washed over the bay, followed by a ripple of incredulous gasps. The engineers stared first at the smoothly operating turret, then at the old man and his strange wrench. The problem that had defeated millions of dollars in technology and thousands of man-age hours of expert labor had been solved in under 5 minutes. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and decisive. General Thompson didn't fire Lieutenant Miller. Instead, he made an example of him. A new, mandatory training initiative was created for all junior engineering officers, the Master Gunner Mentorship Program. It involved spending 60 days, not in a lab, but in the garages and VFW halls of retired Army mechanics and tankers. Lieutenant Miller was a first volunteer. He was stripped of his command in the bay and reassigned to what the other officers called purgatory, but what he would later call the most important education of his life. A formal written apology from the divisional command was delivered to Gerald Walsh's home. About a month later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Lieutenant Miller walked into the local VFW post. He was out of uniform, wearing simple jeans and a polo shirt. He spotted Gerald Walsh at a corner table with 3 other old veterans, a disassembled carburetor from a classic Ford sitting on a greasy rag between. Miller hesitated at the door, then took a breath and walked over. Gerald looked up and saw him, his eyes betraying no surprise. He simply gestured to an empty chair. Miller sat down. He didn't apologize again. That had already been done. Instead, he just pointed to the carburetor. "What's that?" "Peace do," he asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. Gerald Walsh picked up a tiny brass jet with his thick fingers. "This," he began. A small smile on his face is where you listen for the engine secrets. Miller leaned in, closer, ready to learn. If you were inspired by this story of unassuming valor, please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor the quiet heroes who walk among